A smart investor quickly is able to read the psyche of a startup.
Mahesh, thank you for being here. And one important aspect which I wanted to talk to you about is the importance of corporate governance. Corporate governance, how it is important for startups and small scale SMEs as compared to big corporations. So, you as a seasoned banker, what is your take on corporate governance for startups?
Thank you, Sibi. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. Corporate governance is a very passionate topic to me. I think more and more people are becoming more aware of corporate governance. The way I would start with is to say, what is corporate governance? Corporate governance is basically a framework that organizations, corporates adapt to ensure there is a kind of a policy, a kind of a guidebook, a kind of a rule, a policy that is needed to keep ethics in the business, transparency in the business. It should have accountability. It should have defined the role of each stakeholder in the business. As you know, in a big corporation, it's fairly more defined, and over a period of time, it has evolved. So people know each one's role. What is the role of a board of a director, the role of an executive management, the role of employees, the role of external stakeholders like external audit. But in a startup, especially where the capital is a constraint, these roles are sometimes not very clearly defined. But as markets evolve, these roles and the importance of corporate governance is becoming more and more critical, because these are startups who understand that they are here for long term, and for long term they know they need investments, and that means that they need to clearly define the framework. So putting a corporate policy for corporate governance is becoming very important. The role of the director, the role of the stakeholder is very clearly put into place, so that investors who come to them clearly understand how this is kind of defined. I think the moment you read a startup or any company's corporate governance policy, you know the amount of the vision that the principal or the promoter has put in and his vision will clearly come into that corporate governance manual or policy book, because it clearly shows what your long-term vision is, how each stakeholder's role is defined. It should be clearly for the long term. It cannot be, there can't be a digression of view between what the investor is looking for and what the management wants to do. I think this is becoming very important, and I think both the countries also are clearly now putting this as, if not mandatory in some part of the world, it's become a part of the kind of requirement that many companies have to follow. So UAE, for example, has a corporate governance policy. India has evolved and has various government kind of bodies, starting from the corporate affairs to other bodies that look at all kinds of accountability. So to put this in perspective, corporate governance should take care of the transparency, it should take care of accountability, it should take care about how fairness is there in terms of all aspects of the business. I think sometimes companies just talk about from an investor point of view and from a management point of view, but it goes beyond that. I think it goes to employees, how they're remunerated when you're a startup. Is it largely fair to the employee, where they would have to participate into the growth of the company? It should also encompass the other external associates and stakeholders, which is your client, your supplier. Sometimes certain promoters tend to ignore that, but I think corporate governance should clearly also encompass all participants in the business. If that is not defined, you will have issues where a third party supplier might have some integrity issues, and you will be drawn into it for the wrong reasons, and it could lead to a reputational damage to your company. I think investors, especially when it comes to startup, gauge this very seriously. They want to know the trust that they can build onto the entrepreneur and the startup promoter. So it's very important part of startup culture. So it's not just the large organization; it's critically important for even new and startup companies that form in any part of the world.
So the key being the word, as you said, is long-term thinking,
It's
right?
clearly long-term thinking. It is also, sometimes as a startup, you might want to compromise long-term for short-term gain. I think that should be clearly addressed, and it should always be in the interest of the long-term and not cut corners with it.
Yeah. Now, corporate governance as a subject, as a domain, from startups to economies. And most of these startups, now we have seen a very good inflow of startups from India or this region coming to particularly Dubai, the UAE. Now, how does corporate governance as a discipline stack up in economies like India, UAE, as compared to economies like US? So, how does that play out?
See, it's any business is a process of evolution. I think today we look towards the West because we think that they are more evolved in these areas. So they've thought through over a period of time. If you look at how businesses evolve, similarly corporate governance has also evolved. For example, if you see a few years back, not many people spoke about data protection. Today, it's become a very known topic across people that data protection is important. There is government having rules against for data protection. We've all seen how social media companies like Instagram and Facebook had to face a lot of wrath from Senate and Congress for breaching certain data protection privacy act. So this is an evolutionary process. Of course, the West, especially Northern America and United States, have really gone quite ahead with this. It's not that UAE or India is lagging behind. Both these countries are very pragmatic. They clearly have understood the need, and they are quite dynamic in terms of adapting to all of this. One of the things I would add is that the role of an independent director is slightly misunderstood in the economies such as India and UAE, where they tend to think that someone who is close to the business, who is close to the promoter, should be inducted as an independent director. I think there is a flaw in this process, because you really want an independent director to be someone who is unbiased, who wants to overlook and sort of have a governance over the whole business. I think that independency has to be a little bit more taken into consideration. It should be someone who is an expert, who has domain expertise, if it's a technology person or depending on the business, where someone who understands the business and who has certain credibility and reputation in the market to be an independent director, rather than just have a friend to be an independent director. Leaving this aside, I think both UAE and India are very quick to adapt to various policies that is needed for corporate governance. I don't think there is nothing that they are not aware of. They quickly adapted to all of this. You've seen series of policies that come in both India as well as UAE as far as corporate governance goes. One of the recent development, which is very interesting, I think it's a few days old news, is that they have made even tax accountants or chartered accountants now accountable for various things. I think earlier the role of a tax consultant was just to do a tax analysis or a
compliance.
Now they are accountable if there is a kind of fraud associated, or if there's a money laundering associated. As a banker, I can tell you, it's very important that the chartered accountant is made accountable. Otherwise, it has led people to believe that once it is audited or you have a tax consultant sign off, it is taken as it's correct. but there has been instances where it has not been, and there has been fraud or kind of cheating that has happened because of that. So I think this is being clearly plugged by India, and now I think many other countries will follow that and make sure that all these bodies are now regulated. So this is a very interesting time that you're seeing.
And having an independent director, as you said, on the board has a lot to do with corporate governance itself.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So coming from the corporate governance part to a term, a discipline again which has global attention now is ESG.
Correct.
So what is your take on ESG, especially for startups?
So the way I look at, again, to go back on the governance part, I think one critical important part that I am very passionate about is that one is you make rules, you make policies, you make guidelines, but it's equally important to instill these rules and guidelines as part of the culture of the whole corporation. That is a process that has to be done through education, through training, through collective meetings and interaction from the management, the investor, and the employees, and all the other stakeholders, where all these corporate governance principles are instilled as a culture to the organization. Similarly, as I said, when I refer to an organization, there are other participants that sometimes get missed out, which is external to the organization, which could be your client, could be your outsourcing as a party, it could be another entity from an advertising agency. So when you go out of your organization to the third party that are associated with you, you slowly start looking at the community approach. So then so ESG, as you know, stands for environmental, social, and G stands for governance. E stands for environment, S stands for social, and G stands for governance. This E and S is now becoming very sensitive because communities, governments, countries are very now giving a lot of importance to environment. UAE, as you know, is hosting the COP summit this year. So the importance to environment is a very important part of the society. It impacts society. If your business is doing something, it has to become a culture to ensure that the environment is protected. It is not just a policy, it has to be implemented, it should be advocated. Social impact that it can bring to we spoke just now about robotics and AI and what it could impact jobs. There is a social element to that, and I think it's critically important that the entrepreneur, the promoter does in the right way, so that there is no social wrong impact or negative impact. I think this makes ESG very important. I think the ethics and transparency and integrity has to be a part and parcel of the business. It can't be just a policy written and only some aspect of it is followed. All aspect of it should become an integral part of not just the management or the CEO of the business. It should be part of the entire culture of the team, the employees, and all your suppliers should also say, I want to deal with this firm because of its ethics. And this also brings a lot of PR, because the moment you advocate such integrity. If you look at now, this is not a startup, but 25 years back, Infosys was a startup, and why Infosys stood out was clearly the ethics that it had and the kind of governance that it brought in. So success also comes with this, your brand image, your goodwill, the brand valuation improves with ESG. If you are doing something for the society, you're doing something for the environment, it clearly stands out. More importantly, as a banker and from an investment point of view, today there are designated ESG funds, especially in developed markets such as Europe, where ESG is a very sensitive sensitive in a positive way. People give a lot of importance to ESG, and there are a lot of ESG funds sitting with large funds to deploy, and their target companies would clearly be companies that adhere to these rules and policies that come into the ESG framework, and there is EU directives into what is the do's and don'ts that they need to look at. By default, it's like an index. If you look at, for example, an MSCI Asia index, by default, by being part of the index, India will get an allocation. The moment the MENA allocation comes, automatically UAE gets. Similarly, if you're part of an ecosystem and a startup which has given importance and you project ESG as a theme, it draws a certain breed of investors who really want that. So you automatically get allocation of funds coming in. It may not perhaps be at a seed or a pre-seed level, but the moment you go into a VC level, you will have funds that have very clear, they have importance to that ESG, and they will then look at your company, evaluate your company, and you get to benefit if you are adhering to the policies that comes under the ESG scope.
So, you being a seasoned banker, you are the most closest to angels and raising investments. How do you think that, investors, particularly not at the institutional level, but at the angel level, evaluate the impact of ESGs in a startup, or how do they adhere to it? And how can that actually benefit them raising funds at an early stage?
So the way I look at it always is that if you look at any angel investor or what we call as a private investor, not an institutionalized investor, these are investors who have obviously been very successful in their business, who have either sold their business and they're sitting on a large pool of liquidity that they want to deploy now into new age businesses. It could be a seasoned business group that have suddenly realized that they want to invest into startups. So what I'm driving at is that these are generally very smart investors. This is not a retail type of investor. These are investors who have obviously seen successes in their business, and that's why they are looking to deploy that. A smart investor quickly is able to read the psyche of a startup. I think you cannot fool such an investor. This investor will clearly look into the genuineness of the promoter. What is his long-term vision? Is he desperate for money? I don't think any smart investor will put money into a firm which is desperate. They want to see that you have bootstrapped yourself to run the business and you're looking at additional money to grow. That growth path is where they were looking for investment. I think this is a very important aspect that they look at. So from a governance point of view, it's very important for especially private investors to gauge how ethical and the promoter is and all associated to this company are. Critically important. I think the last thing that an investor would do is not read that part of the angle of the investment. Coming to the other two, which is E and S, I think today most of the people are very cognizant. They are very passionate about any aspect of impact and philanthropy. It may not necessarily be that they are passionate about environment, but there is a kind of an other element other than just seeing returns. They want to see there is a social impact. So sometimes the seed investor might have a certain particular passion towards and may draw his investment to that kind of investment, but they all have a certain passion, a certain drive. Some could be towards environment, some could be to some social causes. It could vary as from person to person, but there is a purpose. The purpose is very clearly looked at, and startups should really project what is that additional purpose other than making money that they are doing to the society. So, and it really comes as a plus point rather than as a negative point.
So basically, startups as a entity, if they're looking not just, solving business problems, but creating social impact, larger impact on the society and long-term thinking, corporate governance and ESG is something which should be something which right from the day one should be part of their discipline and culture.
It has to be. I think the mistake certain people do in business is to look at clearly the return and the profit part. I think businesses that have been successful across the world are businesses that looked at providing a solution rather than just the monetary aspect. The larger purpose is, what am I doing this for? Does it solve a problem? If the business is not solving something, is not adding value, there's no way that business is going to be successful. I think if the goal is very clear that I'm starting to do this, whether it is technology, the objective is to solve this missing piece in the world or in the person, then automatically that becomes a success, and then people will see through it, and that is the clear part of the purpose of the business. So the purpose of the business has to be very clearly defined, and that will come through when you speak to the promoter, that what is his objective and what is his vision,
and keeping in mind the societal and the environmental aspect of it.
Absolutely.